A plumber to HVAC. So there's it's complicated because there's actually HVAC has four different trades, right? So there's HVAC or HVAC-R, as they say, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. So those are a whole bunch of things. So there's a lot of trades involved in HVAC. There's plumbing, there's gas, there's electrical, there's sheet metal workers, there's refrigeration technicians, and then there's controls guys. And so there's a huge racket in controls because there's only three. There's a few companies that service. There's a few really popular controls. So there's Johnson Controls, there's Siemens, and there's Delta Controls, and they really only one company can service each one. Those systems are super locked down. So once you have it in your building, it's impossible to get anybody else to work on it. I went off on a tangent though, but basically, when you look at an HVAC design, the biggest thing is the sheet metal, which is like the ductwork. How does air get from one point to another? Supply and return. And so that part of the system can only be done by sheet metal workers, which is basically their own trade. So they're the only ones that really do sheet metal, and in order to do sheet metal, it's not just an education. It's a 4-year apprenticeship program wherever you are, but it's also it's really, really a skill that you have to master in order to be really good at it. So you really need 4 years of experience at least, just to get to where, maybe more, just to make it so that it looks like a quality job. If you do a really bad job, then nobody's gonna hire you. And you also need a lot of special equipment to make the sheet metal. So most sheet metal companies have a shop where they bend the metal into pieces that then go out in the field so they can be put together. They don't really, if you have a really big job, you want to measure and make all your sheet metal in your shop and then take it to site and put it together, so you're not sitting there at a job site bending metal all day. Now you have to bend some on the shop at the site, because not everything fits exactly perfectly. So there's that. Oh, I forgot, there's one more trade, which is welding. Sometimes if the air pressure in the duct is really high, then it gets welded together. Whereas if it's not too high, then they put the sheet metal together by bending it, bending little corners into it and shoving it together, and then they just use like a glue kind of to seal the ducts, to seal any gaps. So there's that. So yeah, plumbers don't do that. Now let's say, okay, do plumbers do gas fitting? So plumbers do not do gas fitting. In order to do any work with gas, you have to be a gas fitter, but most plumbers get the gas fitting ticket when they get their plumbing ticket, and because it's part of the curriculum. So they just write the second exam and then they end up with gas fitter class B or class A, and they're basically it's really easy to get a gas fitting ticket after you've got a plumbing ticket, because it's considered related experience. But there's certain rules as to what you can do. So a lot of plumbers who are gas fitters, they can install a furnace, let's say. The furnaces are great money, especially residential furnaces, because what happens is in the winter your furnace breaks down, and then you're like, oh no, my furnace is broken, and then you basically have to replace the furnace right away, and if you don't, your house will freeze and your pipes will burst, and then you'll be really miserable. So if your furnace breaks, you gotta call a plumber, gas fitter, whatever, and they'll pay you any amount of money, and then the plumber, gas fitter shows up with a brand new furnace and puts the furnace in. So the HVAC guy totally can do a furnace. They can do any size furnace. Plumber, gas fitter can replace a furnace that's like up to a certain limit. So what you'll see now, same applies to hot water tanks, right? So if your hot water tank fails and you really want a hot water tank, then you want to get the hot water tank replaced right away, because if your hot water tank fails and you have no hot water, you can't take a shower, you can't wash your dishes, you can't cook, so you'll be pretty miserable without a hot water tank. So a plumber or gas fitter I know says in the winter he makes, in like 3-4 months, he makes enough money for the whole year just replacing furnaces, because people will pay. And now there's also these other companies that do financing, an instant credit approval. So if you're a plumbing company, you make a deal with one of these financing companies, and so your homeowner says, oh, my furnace broke, I need a new furnace. And it's like, okay, you need a new furnace, it's going to be $8,000 or $12,000 or $14,000 or whatever. Then you're like, well, I have to pay $14,000, I don't have the money. But then I say, well, you can sign it, you can go online and you fill out this form and you get instant credit approval, and then you pay monthly for like 5 years or 6 years or 8 years, and it's a very high interest rate, like 18%. But you're not thinking about it, you're thinking, well, I don't have the money and my furnace broke and I need a new furnace. And so the financing company makes the 18%, and your plumber gets paid the cash instantly as soon as the job is done. So plumber's really happy. Plumbers love 18% interest. Or plumbers don't care, they're not getting the interest, but they're getting paid, and they're able to sell a product at a much higher price to somebody, because that person isn't having to pay cash up front, they're financing it. And if they go broke paying for the furnace, that's on them. It doesn't really matter. Plumber doesn't care, he took his money and left. But then the second best option is, what happens, the hot water tanks are the same thing, air conditioners are the same thing. Those plumbers can install air conditioners technically, so for a house, as long as, now a plumber, there's another exception, which is a plumber is allowed to install the control wiring for the furnace, and they're allowed to do the final hookup for the electrical wire into the air conditioner or into the furnace. You don't need to be a licensed electrician to do that, but to run the circuit and put the breaker from the panel and pull an electrical permit, you need to have a master electrician pull the permit, and you need to have a minimum journeyman electrician or electrician run the cable for you for that connection. But you, the plumber, can hook up that part. So that really covers residential. So yeah, plumbers can do like hot water tanks, and it makes a lot of sense because hot water tanks are mostly gas fired, because electric hot water tanks are very inefficient. They burn a lot more energy to heat the same amount of water. So you never really want to go with an electric tank or electric tankless system. You want to go with the gas fired one. And so plumber's doing all the water connections, he might as well do the gas as well. So that's why, yeah, plumbers do hot water tanks, they do the gas portion. Now when you get bigger, the thing is, you'll see there's all kinds of different furnace companies and all kinds of different air conditioning companies. Like Carrier is like a really big air conditioning company, and in order to sell a residential Carrier equipment, you have to you can get really good pricing if you do enough volume. So if you're installing 20 or 30 furnaces or air conditioners a year, Carrier, Trane, Lennox, whoever, can give you the furnaces or the equipment really, really cheap. And that's the other thing. You can't buy a homeowner can't buy a furnace. It's impossible. You can buy it on Amazon, but if you go to Home Depot, let's say, or if you go to any of these companies that sell furnaces, Carrier, Lennox, whatever, they won't sell to you. Home Depot sells furnaces, but they don't sell. They won't give you a furnace in a box that you can take and install yourself. If you go to the Home Depot website and you try to buy a furnace, there's no link to add a furnace to your cart. There's only they'll set you up with an installer that will come and do the furnace for you. And that's how it works. So that protects the market, so that homeowners can't do it themselves. But it also it's also kind of risky to sell a furnace to a homeowner that doesn't know what they're doing. It could risk blowing up the house. Especially, a furnace guy, homeowner is not a licensed gas fitter. I don't care who you are. You're not gonna know if you don't, unless you've got. There's a reason that trades take a lot of time and experience to get to where they are, is because the code is a big thick book, and there's thousands of rules. There's thousands of rules in the plumbing code. There's thousands of rules in the gas code. There's thousands of rules in the electrical code. And the reason is because every time somebody got hurt or some property got damaged or something bad happened, then they made another rule. Don't do this, don't do that. Use a wire that's at least this thick, etc., etc., etc. And the reason they did that is because they know that somebody got hurt, and so they had to prove. So I digress. Where was I? So plumbers, they can do HVAC, but there's a limit, and the limit is generally what we say is it's measured in Canada. It's measured in British thermal units, or BTUs. So basically, a piece of equipment produces a certain amount of heat, and that is 200,000 BTUs, let's say, or 500,000 BTUs, or whatever. So a plumber is limited to 199,000 BTUs. Past that, you need to bring in a sheet metal worker, an HVAC guy who can do the HVAC. So if you've got a giant air handler, or a giant an air handler, let's say, typically a sheet metal worker will install the air handler, and then you've got plumbing connections to it for the chilled water, the glycol, hot water, whatever you're doing to heat or cool the air. And then you've got electrical connections, and then you've got controls connections. So can a plumber install an air handler? You actually need a plumber to install an air handler, because they got to do all the pipe work for it, typically, depending on your setup. So as I say, if you look at a commercial system, you've got ductwork, and so you need an HVAC guy to do the ductwork, because A, that's the law, and B, a plumber doesn't have enough experience or tools to do it typically. But a plumber can install, let's say, a boiler, a small boiler, or a commercial hot water tank, a commercial furnace, and they can do that if they have, if that piece of equipment is less than 199,000 BTUs. And what you'll see is a ton of equipment out there is listed at exactly 199,000 BTUs, and the reason is that manufacturers know about the rule, and so they make equipment that's just right at the limit, so that they can sell to plumbers. They can sell to, because they know that the plumbers want the work, and they want as many people to install their equipment as possible. So they've made equipment that's just right at the limit. And you have a setup, and I could say I need one big hot water tank, but I could actually put 2 smaller hot water tanks. Or I need a big furnace, I could put 2 smaller furnaces. But again, like, there's a reason for that. So then you get the other point, which is, how is your building? There's 2 concepts to HVAC. The first one is we're circulating air. So every building needs like a certain number of air changes per hour, and so like a laboratory or a pharmacy needs more air circulation than, say, an office. And so how do you get air moving? And you get air moving through the ductwork, which is sheet metal. You always have to have that. And you also have to have fans, really big fans that circulate the air. So you can have fans like exhaust fans pulling air out, and you can have fans on the roof bringing air in. So then you have some kind of like unit that circulates the air. So circulation is the first step. The second step is, how do I make the air warm in the winter and cool in the summer? So then I need air conditioners. So the way that I heat or cool the building is, now you've got some options here. So depending on how you do it, you have like a central system. So you can buy what's called a packaged unit, which is also known as a rooftop unit, which is one big giant box. And so that box sits on the roof, and your ductwork plugs into that, and that system connects to a thermostat or a building management system, and then it heats the air when it needs to heat the air, and it cools the air when it needs to cool the air, and it brings in fresh air from the outside, and it exhausts, or it returns air from the inside. So now it's not bringing in 100% fresh air. It's only typically bringing in, let's say, 30% fresh air, and it's recycling the rest of the air. But air is circulating through the unit. And so this thing, the HVAC guy installs it, but the plumber gas fitter comes and hooks up the gas, and the electrician hooks up the electricity. So this thing has gas so that it can burns gas, and the heat from burning the gas gets transferred to the air. Or it's also got electricity to operate the computer inside, because these things are computerized, and electricity to operate the fans. So that's the second step. And then your other system is exhaust fans. So exhaust fans are installed by the HVAC guy again. They're usually electric, so then you need an electrician to hook up the fan, and you need a controls guy. Really, there's no work for a plumber there. And then you've got makeup air units. So makeup air units provide 100% fresh air, and they also typically heat the air. The makeup air units usually use electricity to operate, or gas. They usually use gas. So you need a gas fitter to hook those up. And the reason you have a makeup air unit is to replace the air that the exhaust fan took out. So you're exhausting a certain amount of air, you have to replace it, otherwise your building ends up under negative pressure and you can't open your doors. Basically, we create a vacuum inside the building, which isn't good. I mean, in some cases that's what you want, but slight pressure difference depending on what you're doing inside, like keep contaminants away. Now, the next thing is, sometimes you want to heat the air because what's called an air handling unit. So an air handling unit is like a giant box. It's just like a rooftop unit, but it doesn't have gas or anything. But what happens is you get gas, you get electricity to run the fans in this thing, and this thing just cycles air through the building and through the makeup air unit. But what you actually get is your building will have a boiler. So a boiler is like in the central plant of the building, and the boiler boils water and then it pumps the water through the water pipes. And so you need a plumber to run water pipes into the unit, into the air handling unit, and then the heat from the water heats the air as it goes through, and then when the air goes back into the building, that heats the building. And then you also have a chiller, so the chiller cools the water in the central plant of the building, and then you need a plumber to hook the water up into the air handling unit, and so that water goes in, and so heat from the air gets transferred into the cold water, and that cools the air. So that's basically your air conditioning. But now this air handler is not, it's also connected, it can be connected to fresh air intake, so it can bring fresh air in, which is the point of having the heating or the cooling. So, but it doesn't have a gas connection. But again, you need a plumber and you need an electrician. And then, so that's the first option for like centralized air. But the second option, which is also depending on your setup, is hey, I can bring air in and just circulate it and not heat it or cool it, and then I'll provide like localized heating. Or sometimes depending on the building design, you can have spots where it's not efficient to bring air to heat or cool through a central system, like on an exterior wall or in an entrance, like in a vestibule. So you may want to add like a unit heater or a box, a radiant heater. So you got different options. You've got, let's say, radiant panels. So radiant panels give off heat through radiation, like kind of like a microwave, and they sit in the ceiling, or they can sit in the wall. They can be baseboard heaters, or they can be in the ceiling. They can sit in like a ceiling grid. There you can get them like the size of a ceiling tile, or you can get really big ones. And the HVAC guys install these, and then depending on, now these things, they can be electric. So if they're electric, then there's nothing for the plumber to do. The electrician just hooks them up to the power. Or they can be water. So again, if you want to use a radiant heat, you can have a central plant where the water boils, and then you run the water pipe to the heating panel and connect it in. So then you absolutely need a plumber to do the water connection. Only the plumber can do it. So there's that. And then you also have so you got baseboard heaters, and then you've also got what we call split systems. So if you've got let's say a refrigerator, like a really big walk-in cooler, let's say, or you've got a server room that needs to be cooled separately from the rest of the system, where you don't really need air coming in sometimes, but you need, you've got a lot of devices that generate an extra ridiculous amount of heat, then you have a situation, right? Because you can have a giant rooftop unit, but let's say you've got a building where it's winter time, and so the whole building is cold, and so you need the rooftop unit to heat the whole building, but you've got a server room that's really, really, really hot because you've got a ton of equipment running in the server room that needs to be cooled off. And so there's not a lot you can do. You can put an exhaust fan, but what's really more efficient is to put, let's say, a split system air conditioner. It's technically not an air conditioner, it's more like it's a heat pump, because it's not actually moving air out of the room. What it's doing is it's moving the heat out of the room. And so it uses a refrigerant, so you've got one component inside the room, which is a condenser, and then you've got the evaporator on the roof. And so, you've got the compressor on the roof basically. So it pumps refrigerant down into the server room, and the refrigerant is really, really cold because it's expanded. And then, so the condenser picks up the air from the room. The air passes through the condenser, and the heat transfers into the refrigerant, and then the refrigerant is pumped up to the roof to the compressor, and the compressor compresses the refrigerant, and when the compressor compresses the refrigerant, that causes it to release the heat out into the open, and the cycle basically just circulates. Now, when the refrigerant picks up, when the heat transfers from the air into the refrigerant, that causes the moisture in the air to create condensation on the piping inside that system, and so you have to connect these split systems into a drain. But if you don't connect it into a drain, then you got a big puddle of water. So then you absolutely need a plumber to put that in. So those are really where plumbers work. So yeah, plumbers can do some HVAC, especially if they're gas fitters, and sometimes you need a plumber to do HVAC. And then there's some cases where there's stuff that plumbers can't touch or shouldn't touch, especially without their experience. So yeah, you got any questions?